Welcome back, everybody. The heartbeat of the drums, the heartbeat of reggae music, bringing us in. And that unmistakable horn riff. Every reggae fan knows that riff. The song is called Sata Masagana. The lyrics in Amharic, the language of Ethiopia. Originally recorded by the Abyssinians in 1969. Looking to the east, looking to Africa, the motherland. Look into the east and you will see there's a land far, far away. This version has been covered many times in reggae, sometimes called the national anthem of reggae, one of the most important songs. This particular version performed by Cedric Brooks and the Mystic Revelation of Rastafari, live recording from the early 1980s. Sata Masagana, spelled different ways, originally recorded by the Abyssinians, an early name for Ethiopia, looking to Ethiopia, and specifically its emperor Haile Selassie, revered by the Rastafarians of Jamaica as a living deity, as God made flesh and walking the earth to deliver the black race out of bondage. Labor organizer and civil rights activist in the early 1900s, Marcus Garvey, was attributed to have said, "Look to the east for the coming of a black king, for the time of deliverance shall be at hand." And the crowning of Haile Selassie in 1930 was taken to be that sign. And this caused the origins of the Rastafari movement. Part religious revival movement, part black power, black consciousness movement, looking to their roots in Africa for the way forward out of their out of bondage, continuing bondage from delivery to the Western Hemisphere. This caused an explosion of what came to be known as roots reggae, particularly as the 1970s progressed in reggae. What is roots? What is roots reggae? It's a convenient shorthand, often used by reggae fans. Every reggae fan will kind of know what you mean if you say roots. To others, might be a little confusing. I'm going to try and explain it a little bit here. Roots basically is a state of consciousness, a state of being, also a sound, maybe a heavy, uncompromising sound of dread to go with the dreadlocks, a sound of intimidation against those who are oppressing you, against what the Rastas called Babylon, the economic and political forces arrayed against them. For much of its early days, Rastafari was at odds with the police and the government. There were many violent clashes. Finally, there was an academic report from the university in Jamaica that said Rastafari was a peaceful movement, and this led to an easing of tensions, which allowed the movement to flourish even further, finally exploding into consciousness in 1966 when Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie set foot on the island and was greeted by throngs of Rastafarians descending upon the airport tarmac to the point where he could not exit his plane for hours. From then on, you see an explosion of roots reggae themes throughout reggae, becoming more and more explicit in their praising of Rastafari, songs of devotion, songs also of social realism. These themes had kind of always been part of Jamaican music from the very early days, even going back to Mento, the Jamaican version of Calypso, and Calypso itself. They kind of have this troubadour tradition where the singers will comment on news of the day. The music would be kind of like a a newspaper, the poor people's newspaper. They would communicate to each other what was going on, what was happening, what was the news of the day, and this carried on into reggae. Very early in the 1960s, you would see these kind of themes coming up. Rastafari particularly, very influential among the musicians, particularly members of the Skatalites, all who were at least familiar with Rastafari. Some were out and out followers of the movement, like Don Drummond, Johnny Dizzy Moore of the Skatalites, Lloyd Nibbs, of the drummer of the Skatalites, influenced by some of that Rastafari drumming developed by Count Ossie and his group, later to become the mystic revelation of Rastafari. So that element of the Rastafarian drumming, part of reggae, part of the roots, definitely coming to the forefront as the 60s progress into the 1970s. Roots reggae came about as a result of a number of factors. Following independence of Jamaica in the early 1960s, the optimism, the energy, the excitement, you see that in kind of the fast-paced, upbeat tempos of ska, generally slowing down as reality begins to set in, as economic downturns start to sink in. In 1972, the People's National Party was elected to take over the government of Jamaica, led by the charismatic Michael Manley, who styled himself as the biblical Joshua, a prophet to deliver his people out of bondage. This was celebrated in many songs of the time, particularly Max Romeo, Junior Biles. All of these singers made songs with reference to what was going on at the time. Certainly what we came to be known as roots was beginning to be evident in songs like Joshua's Desire by Junior Biles, Joshua's desire to set his people free, to set Jamaica on a better economic course. The opposition leader would be styled as Pharaoh, Joshua versus Pharaoh. You had a biblical element to the conflict between the Michael Manley's socialist leaning government and the JLP government, which was more conservative. So these kind of biblical metaphors were very present in Jamaican music right from the early days. Every Jamaican knew their Bible and would pick up on those references right away. It was also a Rastafarian element creeping into the music. With those references. They could kind of code it a little bit. When you listen to American gospel music of the late 1950s, early 1960s, the civil rights era, you can kind of read some of those gospel songs as a coded civil rights message. Kind of a similar thing in reggae music, I feel. They couldn't come out and explicitly state Rastafari. It was very risky for your physical health. Beatings were commonplace, forcible shavings of your dreadlocks by the police. All these things went on. There was a lot of persecution. But finally, through a combination of factors, this increasing economic downturn, social pressure, rising crime, the economy sinking, rising inflation, falling income. By the late 1970s, apparently 3/4 of Jamaica's population living under the official poverty line, rampant unemployment, food shortages, rising food prices, coupled with election time violence, as both the main political parties had heavily armed gangs enforcing their will. So every election year would be marked by rampant gun battles, which would leave hundreds dead. And this is celebrated in the music increasingly as time goes on. Starting in the late 1960s, following on from that visit of Haile Selassie and the increasing influence of Rastafari, Rasta themes were not going to be kept under locks much longer. Certain artists started to come out and explicitly state their allegiance to the movement. The old line producers like Duke Reid, who was notoriously hostile to any notion of Rastafari, Coxsone Dodd, his main rival of Studio One, a little more sympathetic, if not quite a full follower or adherent of the movement. But you started to see a crop of young producers coming to the fore, more attuned to the street level, to what was going on in the country, and putting that music directly out without any kind of a filter. But starting on from Studio One, certainly, he recorded the Abyssinians recording their roots anthem, early roots anthem, Sata Masagana, recorded in 1969. He didn't release it. It was not released for a couple of years later. Apparently the Abyssinians had to buy the tape back from him because he wasn't putting it out. Not an uncommon practice for Cox and Dodd. Again, he was sympathetic to roots music, to the Rastas. He allowed them to smoke ganja in the studio. Just, you had to be a little discreet about it. But he didn't know what to do with that song in that case. But they put it out on themselves, Sata Masagana, followed it up with the nearly as iconic Declaration of Rights, The Good Lord, Forward Unto Zion, all these Rastafarian themes coming out today, coming forward in the music. No Jah today. Jah is their word for God, aka Haile Selassie. So the Abyssinians, iconic roots trio, they weren't the only ones. Again, at Studio One, you had a young man from the country, Winston Rodney, Burning Spear, come out with songs like Ethiopians Live It Out, Door Peep Shall Not Enter, the iconic song. Again, recorded a couple of albums, spent several years at Studio One, didn't fully cross over in the way that he should have at the time. It would not be until the mid-1970s when he would join with a producer called Lawrence Lindo, aka Jack Ruby, that he released the iconic Marcus Garvey album, celebrating that labor organizer and civil rights activist, Jamaican, of the early 20th century, Marcus Garvey, whose words had in some ways presaged many of the theories and the philosophies of the Rasta movement. Put out the iconic Marcus Garvey album. There is there. Burning Spear, still a trio at the time. This is an early pressing on the Jamaican Fox label, sound system copy, with markings on the label. It was also released internationally by Island Records with a slightly different cover. Burning Spear, Marcus Garvey, absolutely iconic album of the mid-1970s on the Mango label there, which solidified the roots reggae movement as it neared its moment of exploding into consciousness. Dreadlocks no longer kind of kept under wraps, hidden under Tams. The DJ Big Youth in the early 1970s reportedly took his hat off on stage, flashed his locks, caused a sensation in the audience. This was, again, an act of defiance, showing your dreadlocks, act of rebelling against the system, against the politics, against the violence. And it could not be contained any longer. But first, the music had to go through what was called the rebel music phase, as kind of shown in Jimmy Cliff's The Harder They Come. Again, the Rasta themes not quite fully out there yet, but definitely a growing social consciousness in the music. You can get it if you really want. Many Rivers to Cross, The Harder They Come itself, the song by Jimmy Cliff, songs like Desmond Decker's Shantytown and his earlier Israelites. Poor me Israelites, me get up every morning slaving for bread so that every mouth can be fed. The growing social realism coming into the music starting in the late 1960s, which would eventually explode into what's called roots reggae. Johnny Too Bad, celebrating the rude boy violence. Rebel music. Bob Marley and the Wailers also heavily involved in this early shift in the direction of reggae towards what's called roots, as younger producers, not beholden to kind of the big two, Cox and Dodd and Duke Reed, kind of seized the reins of reggae and changed the direction to a more authentic, grittier, street-level style of songwriting. Bob Marley and the Wailers, his work with Lee Perry was crucial in both of their careers. In the move to roots reggae, late 1960s, early 1970s, politically, more socially conscious songs like African Herbsman itself, Trenchtown Rock caused a sensation in Jamaica. Riding High, Brainwashing, Peter Tosh's 400 Years, or Bob Marley's 400 Years. Another producer, along with Lee Perry, who was moving things in the rebel direction, was 90 the Observer, Blood and Fire. Can't get no more water to put out the fire. Things were burning. This is a theme cropping up in the music, very biblically influenced. Tommy McCook, Scatolite, original Scatolite, Tommy McCook and the Observers, Psalms 9 to keep in mind. Brimstone and Fire, the Observers, Max Romeo coming with very socially conscious tunes celebrating what was going, or commenting on what was going on. Beardsman Feast, Beardsman, another word for the Rastaman. The Coming of Jah, Max Romeo. Max Romeo, one of the many artists very signifying the shift to a roots consciousness. Rebel Music, compilation put out by Trojan Records in the 1970s, kind of coalesces this transitional phase of the music. Got producers, up-and-coming producers like Keith Hudson, Derek Harriott, Joe Gibbs on here, Black Man Time by Iroy. All these songs are showing the shift in consciousness as grittier themes come to the fore. 1976 marked a turning point. The Jamaican government declared a state of emergency due to the level of gun violence as warring political parties and their gangs that they employed clashed in the streets, leading to hundreds dead. They established what was called the gun court. If you were caught with any kind of a firearm, a bullet, or even a spent shell, you could be sent to the gun court for indefinite detention. It was what Michael Manley called putting the criminal element under heavy manners, was his expression, as commented on by the rockstone-voiced Prince Far-I in Under Heavy Manners, his song of the same name. Manners is like unto a dog. Joe Gibbs' label. Under heavy manners Jamaica was at this time, as economic crisis reached an all-time high, crime and violence reached an all-time high. These songs are absolutely commented on in the music of the day. You had Max Romeo again coming out with War in a Babylon. Original title, It's Sipple Out There, or Slippery. It's slippery. The social situation is slippery. Upsetter's copy there led to the LP of the same name. Tribal War in a Babylon, also celebrated in the famous song Tribal War, I think originally by Little Roy, recorded here by George Nooks, covered by many. Tribal War, we don't want no more of that, as Kingston turned into a war zone, various neighborhoods torn up by routine, incessant violence. You had songs like Leroy Smart's Ballistic Affair come out. We used to lick chalice, cook ital stew together. Through this ballistic affair. These were songs were not metaphorical. They weren't made up. They were commenting on real things that were going on at the time. Even Garth Dennis's Slow Coach was a pointed message to Prime Minister Michael Manley, later recut with his group, The Wailing Souls, as he says, "You've got to stand and be a man. Let the nation know your plan." Very, very pointed, very hard-hitting message of when is this economic reform going to happen? When are we going to get our share? Further commented on by group The Heptones in their classic song, Mr. President, recorded for Lee Perry. Mr. President, don't know if you can see that. Upsetter's 12-inch. Also commented on by Ja Lion, as he says, "Mr. President, come off of your big chair. I need our share." These are pointed messages to the government. This is roots reggae at its all-time high point. 1977, Culture puts out 2/7's Clash. It was a prophecy that in that year, the Rasta prophecy of the 2/7's clashing in the year of 1977. There would be a final showdown between the forces of the righteous and the forces of Babylon. There was apparently record levels of people being absent from school, from work. Absolute high point of Rastafari, roots reggae, with songs like Calling Rastafari, Get Ready to Ride the Lion to Zion, Zion the Promised Land, The Black Star Liner Must Come. The Black Star Liner was the shipping line established by Marcus Garvey that was supposed to take the Africans from the New World back to Africa. And a state of emergency, as shown in the Joe Gibbs album of the same name, 1976, state of emergency. Again, these were real things that were happening, that were being commented on in this music. A good overview of this roots reggae, this Rasta movement was put out by Soul Jazz Records. Rastafari, The Dreads Enter Babylon, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie on his wedding to the future Empress Menen. And those Rasta drummers we heard in the opener, Count Ossie's Troop, preserving the culture of Africa through the Rastafari drumming traditions, which in turn became part of the roots of reggae, the heartbeat of reggae, and the roots above all. So that is my look at roots reggae. Hope it kind of illuminates some of the movements, some of the background of this music. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.